The sky is empty, but Captain James Red Holt knows better. Somewhere in that gray infinity above the bomber stream, German fighters are gathering, circling like wolves around a wounded herd. They're waiting for the moment a bomber shows damage, the moment it falls behind, the moment it becomes easy prey. Yesterday, Holt watched helplessly as 6 Focke-Wulf 190s swarmed a damaged B-17. The bomber lasted 43 seconds. In exactly 4 hours, a 24-year-old artist from Brooklyn with zero military aviation experience will sketch an idea on a napkin that will flip this deadly game on its head. An idea so audacious that when he first presents it, the squadron commander will call it the dumbest thing he's ever heard. An idea involving paint, theater, and the oldest trick in warfare: make your strength look like weakness. Within 30 days, this controversial tactic will save an estimated 180 American lives and remain classified top secret for the next 47 years. March 15, 1944. Over the skies of Brunswick, Germany, Captain James Red Holt banks his P-47 Thunderbolt hard left, eyes scanning the empty sky above the bomber stream. 800 B-17 flying fortresses drone toward their targets, each one carrying 10 young Americans and enough ordnance to flatten a city block. Somewhere in that gray infinity, German fighters are gathering. Holt can feel it. The statistics are killing them. Since January, the 8th Air Force has lost 284 heavy bombers. That's 2,240 men who won't see home again. Fighter escorts like Holt's 359th Fighter Squadron can't be everywhere at once. The Luftwaffe knows this. They've developed a deadly new tactic: ignore the escorts, hit the stragglers. Damaged bombers limping behind the formation, crippled birds with feathered props and smoking engines. Easy meat. Yesterday, Holt watched helplessly as 6 FW-190s swarmed a damaged B-17 called Memphis Belle II. The bomber lasted 43 seconds. This morning's intelligence briefing reported the same pattern across 37 missions. German fighters specifically targeting aircraft showing battle damage, avoiding the healthy ones, refusing to engage fighter screens. The math is simple and brutal. When fighters escort healthy bombers, the Germans wait. When bombers show damage, the Germans pounce, and they do it 3 miles away from where the American escorts are flying. By the time Holt's squadron reaches the attack, it's over. "We're not protecting the right planes," Holt mutters into his oxygen mask. What he doesn't know, what nobody in the 359th Fighter Squadron knows, is that in exactly 4 hours, a 24-year-old artist from Brooklyn with zero military aviation experience will sketch an idea on a napkin that will flip this deadly game on its head. An idea so simple, so audacious that when he first presents it, the squadron commander will call it the dumbest thing he's ever heard. An idea involving paint, theater, and the oldest trick in warfare: make your strength look like weakness. Within 30 days, this controversial tactic will lure 40 German fighters into carefully prepared ambushes. It will save an estimated 180 American bomber crewmen. It will violate at least 3 articles of the Geneva Convention, and it will be classified top secret for the next 47 years. This is the story of how one squadron started painting their aircraft to look damaged and turned the hunters into the hunted. The crisis begins long before March 1944. It begins with a German pilot named Hermann Joseph Pips Priller, who in December 1943 realizes something the Allied command hasn't yet grasped: damaged bombers are predictable. A healthy bomber fights, Priller writes in his tactical doctrine distributed to JG-26. A crippled bomber runs. It separates from the herd. Its escort cannot protect what it cannot reach. We do not hunt the strong, we cull the weak. The results are devastating. In January 1944 alone, 73% of bombers lost over Germany are stragglers, aircraft that fell behind formation due to battle damage, mechanical failure, or wounded crew. The Luftwaffe develops wolf pack tactics specifically designed to exploit this vulnerability. German fighters orbit at distance, watching, waiting for the telltale signs: trailing smoke, feathered propellers, aircraft losing altitude. Then they strike. American Fighter Command tries everything. They assign rescue fighters to escort damaged bombers home. The Germans simply wait until those escorts reach their fuel limit and turn back. They increase fighter patrols around bomber routes. The Germans attack in the gaps. they developed new radio protocols for damaged aircraft to call for help. The Germans jammed the frequencies. Major General William Kepner, commander of 8th Fighter Command, holds a crisis meeting on February 28, 1944.
Gentlemen, we have a problem that tactics alone cannot solve. The enemy has turned our wounded into bait. Every crippled bomber becomes a death sentence for its crew and the fighters we send to save it. The experts all agree the solution is preventing damage in the first place, better armor, tighter formations, more defensive firepower. But these are engineering solutions that will take months or years. Meanwhile, boys are dying every single day. Squadron commanders are tearing their hair out.
Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Dickman of the 359th Fighter Squadron throws his cap across the briefing room after losing 3 fighters trying to protect a single damaged B-24. They're using our wounded as traps. We see a limping bomber, we rush to help, and suddenly we're outnumbered 4-1 with our fuel halfway gone.
It's brilliant. It's ruthless. And I don't know how to stop it.
The consensus among tactical experts is clear: there is no counter to this strategy except to abandon the stragglers.
Several senior officers quietly suggest implementing a survival of the fittest policy. Damaged aircraft are on their own. The proposal reaches General Dwight D. Eisenhower's desk.
He writes one word across it in red pencil: never.
But noble sentiment doesn't save lives. The losses continue.
By mid-March, bomber crews are more afraid of being damaged than being shot down.
At least if you're destroyed, it's quick.
Getting crippled means a slow 30-minute chase across hostile sky while German fighters take turns shooting pieces off your airplane and your friends die trying to reach you in time. The psychological toll is measurable.
Mission abort rates climb. Pilots report seeing battle damage that maintenance crews can't find.
Some crews are requesting transfers to the Pacific Theater, where at least the enemy fights fair. Into this desperate situation walks Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss, age 24, former commercial artist for the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency, current crew chief for the 359th Fighter Squadron. Weiss has no combat experience.
He's never flown in a fighter aircraft.
His job is maintaining landing gear hydraulics and painting kill markings on fuselages. What he does have is an art degree from Cooper Union, 3 years creating deceptive advertising campaigns, and critically, an outsider's perspective unburdened by the assumptions of career military men. On March 15, he's in the officers' club sketching an idea on a cocktail napkin.
Daniel Weiss never intended to change aerial warfare.
He just wanted to stop watching pilots come back with that haunted look in their eyes. Born in Brooklyn to immigrant parents who ran a kosher delicatessen, Weiss grew up sketching on butcher paper and dreaming of becoming a fine artist. Reality intervened in the form of the Depression, and he found himself at the J. Walter Thompson Agency creating advertisements for Pond's Cold Cream and Lucky Strike cigarettes. His specialty was making products look like something they weren't, making the ordinary seem extraordinary, making people see what you wanted them to see. When Pearl Harbor happened, Weiss tried to enlist as a pilot.
He failed the vision test, mild colorblindness.
He tried for bombardier, failed again. They made him a crew chief instead, which Weiss compared to training to be Rembrandt and getting assigned to paint houses. But he's meticulous, and he understands how things look versus how things are. When aircraft return from missions, Weiss is the one who surveys the damage, coordinates repairs, and returns planes to service. Over 6 months, he's learned to read battle damage like a language. He knows what flak bursts look like on aluminum skin. He knows how bullet holes cluster. He knows which damage is fatal and which is theatrical. On the evening of March 15, he's sitting at a corner table in the officers' club, nominally off limits to enlisted men but tolerated because he's popular and keeps pilots company while they process the day's losses.
Captain Holt is 3 whiskeys deep, talking about the B-17 he couldn't save.
They can smell wounded aircraft, Holt says, like sharks smell blood.
How do you fight an enemy that won't engage unless they have the advantage? Weiss is half listening, sketching on a napkin, an old nervous habit.
He's drawing a P-47, but he's adding theatrical battle damage, smoke trails from the engine that don't quite look real, bullet holes that are too symmetrical. It's a caricature, a cartoon of damage. Then his pencil stops. He stares at the napkin, at the fake damage he's drawn.
What if we make them think they have the advantage? Weiss says quietly. Holt doesn't hear him. Weiss says it louder. Captain, what if we make them think they have the advantage? Holt looks up, annoyed. The hell are you talking about, Sergeant? Weiss slides the napkin across the table.
Your P-47, flying escort, but painted to look damaged.
Trailing smoke, theatrical smoke, not real.
Bullet holes painted on, stage wounds, flying like it's crippled, falling behind, looking weak.
Holt's eyes narrow. That's camouflage in reverse. That's bait. Exactly, Weiss says.
And when they come for what they think is easy prey, he sketches 6 more P-47s diving from altitude, the trap springs.
Holt is silent for a long moment. You want to turn fighter escorts into decoys.
I want to turn our strength into their weakness, Weiss says. They hunt wounded animals.
We give them a wounded animal with teeth. The next morning, Weiss expects to be laughed out of the briefing room. Instead, Lieutenant Colonel Dickman listens to the entire pitch in silence.
Then he says 6 words that change everything. Show me.
You have 48 hours.
Weiss commandeers a corner of Hangar 7 and 3 P-47s scheduled for routine maintenance. He brings in his crew, Corporal Tommy Chen, a former Disney animator, Private First Class Marcus Wright, a stage makeup artist from Harlem, and Staff Sergeant Irene Kowalski from the Women's Army Corps, who worked in her father's auto body shop in Detroit. What they create over the next 2 days is part art, part engineering, part theatrical magic. The first challenge, painted damage, won't fool anyone up close.
Weiss needs 3-dimensional realism that works from 500 yards away.
Wright suggests cellulose acetate sheets, clear theater gel, heat-formed and painted to look like damaged aluminum, then attached with quick-release clasps.
From a distance, they're indistinguishable from real battle damage. Up close, they pop off in seconds.
The second challenge, smoke trails.
Real engine damage produces thick black smoke.
Weiss reverse engineers German smoke generator systems from a captured Bf-109, creating a belly-mounted canister that produces theatrical smoke on command, white or black, controllable from the cockpit. The smoke looks wrong to a trained mechanic but perfect to a fighter pilot at 3,000 yards deciding whether to attack. The third challenge, selling the illusion through behavior.
A damaged aircraft doesn't just look different, it flies different.
Weiss creates a performance checklist: reduce speed by 40 miles per hour, lose altitude gradually, feather one prop occasionally, fly slightly off trim. Captain Holt practices the technique, flying a perfect imitation of a crippled aircraft while maintaining full combat capability. On March 17, they present all 3 modified P-47s to Lieutenant Colonel Dickman.
He walks around them, studying every detail.
He touches the fake damaged panels.
He watches the smoke generators cycle. He says nothing. Finally, this violates the laws of war. False flag operations, flying under false pretenses. We're not changing our markings, Weiss interrupts, then remembers rank.
Sir, we're still clearly American aircraft.
We're just exaggerating our condition. This is completely against doctrine, Dickman continues.
Fighters are offensive weapons, not bait. Sir, with respect, Captain Holt says, the Germans made our bombers into bait.
We're just returning the favor. Dickman is quiet for another long moment.
Then he turns to his operations officer.
How long to brief a full squadron on these performance techniques? 48 hours, sir. Do it.
But nobody talks about this outside this hangar. Not to other squadrons, not to intelligence, not to God himself.
If this works, we'll expand it.
If it fails, he looks at Weiss, the sergeant here will spend the rest of the war painting latrine numbers.
Weiss swallows hard. Understood, sir.
One more thing, Dickman says.
I want to fly lead in the first mission. Word leaks faster than classified secrets should.
Within 72 hours, Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group hears about that crazy decoy scheme at the 359th.
He drives over personally to see it.
Zemke watches a demonstration flight. 3 damaged P-47s limp across the sky, smoking and wobbling. 8 more P-47s orbit at 15,000 feet, invisible from below. The decoys perform perfectly, wounded birds, irresistible targets. When they land, Zemke corners Lieutenant Colonel Dickman. Does 8th Fighter Command know about this? Not yet, because they'd shut it down immediately. That's my assessment too. Zemke considers this. He's the most successful fighter commander in the European theater, 17.75 confirmed kills, a legend who rewrote tactical doctrine. His opinion carries weight that can make or break careers. I want in, Zemke says. This is either genius or a court-martial. Either way, I want my group involved before headquarters buries it. March 20th, the demonstration that decides everything. Fighter Command sends Major General William Kepner and a staff of 12 officers to evaluate the program before authorizing or prohibiting its use. They gather in the briefing room at bottom. The room is packed: squadron commanders, intelligence officers, Army Air Force's legal staff, and one very nervous technical sergeant who's beginning to regret every life choice that led to this moment. Weiss presents the concept, the fake damage, the theatrical smoke, the flying performance, the ambush tactics. He uses words like deceptive engagement protocol and asymmetric response strategy because they sound more military than "we're going to fool them with paint and trap them." The legal officer interrupts immediately. This constitutes perfidy under Article 23 of the Hague Convention. Using false signals of distress to lure the enemy is explicitly prohibited. We're not using distress signals, Weiss counters. We're not false flagging. We're using camouflage. Deceptive camouflage, but still camouflage. Camouflage makes you harder to see. This makes you a liar. The American F-4F Wildcat, the Navy's main fighter, was a tough airplane. Its pilots called it a product of the Grumman Iron Works for a reason. It could absorb significant damage that would make a Zero disintegrate, but it was slower, less nimble, and couldn't climb as well as its Japanese rival. Wildcat pilots learned to survive by developing defensive tactics like the famous thatch weave, where two friendly fighters would cross paths to lure a pursuer into the wingman's guns. But these were tactics for survival, not for achieving air dominance. They were a way to reduce losses, not to win the sky outright. The uncertainty among Allied pilots was real. They felt like they were fighting in a machine that was fundamentally outclassed. So the confidence of the Japanese pilots, their laughter at reports of a new, heavier American fighter, wasn't simple foolishness. It was earned from a year of clear aerial dominance. They had every reason to believe the current trend would continue. For the Allies, they were wrong. The era of the Zero's dominance was about to end. For the United States Navy, the situation required a swift response. The lesson was clear, and it had been paid for in the experience of their pilots. They needed a new fighter, not just a better one, but one designed with a different tactical purpose, a machine built not to imitate the Zero but to counter it. The search for a solution didn't start in some sterile design lab. It started with the experienced pilots of the F-4F Wildcat coming back from the front lines. Engineers from Grumman debriefed these pilots consistently. They listened to the accounts of being unable to catch a Zero, of watching it turn quickly. They learned its strengths, but more importantly, they started to catalog its weaknesses. The pilots who survived encounters with the Zero did so by exploiting its few flaws. The Zero couldn't keep up in a high-speed dive. Its controls stiffened up at high speeds, making it less maneuverable. And it was structurally lighter. It lacked pilot armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. A few good hits from the Wildcat's .50 caliber machine guns could severely damage a Zero. While this invaluable feedback was being gathered, the Americans had a stroke of luck. In June 1942, a Zero flown by Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga had engine trouble during a raid on Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands. When he tried to make an emergency landing on Akutan Island, his landing gear dug into the soft ground, flipping the plane and tragically resulting in his death. There in the remote wilderness lay an almost perfectly intact A6M Zero. The Akutan Zero, as it became known, was an intelligence goldmine. It was carefully taken apart, shipped to the United States, and put through exhaustive flight testing.
For the first time, American engineers could thoroughly examine their opponent.
They confirmed what their pilots had suspected. The Zero was a marvel of lightweight engineering, but it was full of compromises. Armor, pilot protection, robust construction, even good radios, all had been sacrificed for maneuverability and range. What the Japanese saw as a philosophy of perfection, the American engineers at Grumman saw as a critical vulnerability. The blueprint for the Zero's countermeasure was now clear. Leroy Grumman and his team at the Iron Works didn't try to build a better dogfighter. They decided to build a heavyweight fighter. The new machine wouldn't try to outdance the Zero in a turning fight. That was a losing strategy. Instead, it would use raw power, overwhelming firepower, and extreme toughness to dictate the fight. The design already in the works was supercharged with this new knowledge.
Grumman made a crucial decision.
They installed the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, a 2,000 horsepower engine. This engine was the heart of the new philosophy. It would give the fighter the power to climb above its enemies and the speed to dive on them, engaging and disengaging at will. This new plane would be heavy, but it was functional weight. It carried hundreds of pounds of armor plating around the cockpit and engine. It had self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb hits without resulting in explosions, and it would carry 6.50 caliber machine guns, a volume of fire that could severely damage a Zero's lighter frame in seconds. The whole concept was a direct answer to the Zero. Where the Zero was light, the Hellcat would be strong. Where the Zero was nimble, the Hellcat would be powerful. Where the Zero sacrificed its pilot for performance, the Hellcat would protect its pilot at all costs. So you can understand why the Japanese pilots laughed. They were looking at a machine that broke all their rules for what made a great fighter. What they didn't realize was that the Americans weren't just building a new plane. They were creating a whole new rulebook for air engagement. When the Grumman F6F Hellcat started showing up in mid-1943, it was a total contrast to the Zero. Lined up on a carrier deck, it lacked the Zero's delicate grace. It was wide, barrel-chested, and brutally functional. It looked exactly like the heavyweight the Japanese pilots had mocked. But this machine was the product of a different and much more effective school of thought. At its core was that powerhouse engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, churning out over 2,000 horsepower. This power plant was the heart of a whole new combat doctrine. It gave the Hellcat a phenomenal rate of climb and impressive speed, especially at high altitudes where the Zero struggled. This power gave a Hellcat pilot the ultimate advantage, the ability to choose when and where to fight. If things looked difficult, he could simply use his speed to disengage. Wrapped around this engine was an airframe built with classic Grumman toughness. The company's philosophy was simple. Build planes that bring their pilots home. The Hellcat was armored with over 200 pounds of plating shielding the pilot and vital systems. The fuel tanks were self-sealing, helping prevent fires. The windscreen was bullet-resistant glass. Pilots would come back in Hellcats that looked heavily damaged, wings shredded, riddled with holes, and lived to tell the tale. This survivability wasn't just a morale booster. It meant they kept their most valuable asset, experienced pilots. And those pilots had a significant weapon. The Hellcat carried 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, a devastating spray of heavy slugs that could tear a fragile Zero apart in seconds. American pilots were trained to aim for the Zero's wings where the unprotected fuel tanks were, quickly disabling the nimble fighter. When the first reports on the Hellcat reached Japan, they were met with a mix of disbelief and mockery. The Japanese analysis saw the Hellcat's weight, over 12,000 pounds loaded compared to the Zero's 6,000, and concluded it would be a clumsy aircraft. Their entire doctrine was based on the turning dogfight. By their math, the Hellcat couldn't possibly compete. And they were absolutely right. The Hellcat stood no chance in a turning fight with a Zero. The fatal flaw in their logic was assuming the Hellcat would ever be foolish enough to try. This was all compounded by a massive gap in pilot training. Japan's pool of elite veteran pilots was being depleted. The rigorous training program that had created men like Saburo Sakai couldn't keep up with the losses. By 1944, new Japanese pilots were being sent to the front with a tiny fraction of the flight hours their predecessors had. In contrast, the United States was turning pilot training into an industrial process. New American naval aviators arrived in the Pacific with 500 to 600 flight hours, many with 200 hours in the Hellcat itself. America wasn't just building a better plane. It was mass-producing better prepared pilots. The stage was set. The laughter was about to stop. The first major engagements were confusing for the Japanese pilots. When Hellcats saw their first major action in September 1943, the results were a significant shock. The Japanese, expecting a lumbering beast, were met with an unexpected opponent. The Hellcats refused to play their game. Instead, they used a cold, calculated method of engagement: boom and zoom. A Hellcat pilot, using his powerful engine, would climb high above the fight. From there, he'd pick a target, roll over, and plummet downward, converting altitude into blistering speed. The Zero below often wouldn't see it coming. The Hellcat would scream through the formation in a single devastating pass, its 6.50 calibers engaging for just a split second. Then, using that energy, it would rocket back up to safety to set up another attack. For all its agility, the Zero was at a disadvantage. If it tried to follow the Hellcat in a dive, its controls would stiffen. If it tried to follow in the climb, its weaker engine would leave it a vulnerable target. On top of that, there was the thatch weave. Perfected by Wildcat pilots, this team-based tactic turned the Zero's greatest strength into a fatal weakness. When a Zero got on a Hellcat's tail, its wingman would turn toward it. The targeted pilot would then turn to face his wingman, forcing the Zero to either give up or fly right into the second Hellcat's guns. It was simple, effective, and often overwhelming. The impact hit the Japanese naval air arm hard. Pilots who had been masters of the sky were now facing relentless pressure. Their reports were filled with disbelief. The new American fighter wasn't clumsy. It was brutally fast. It wouldn't turn and fight in a prolonged engagement. It just appeared from above, killed with terrifying efficiency, and vanished. Against the Zero, the Hellcat quickly established a remarkable victory ratio. The psychological impact was immense. This building dread finally culminated on June 19, 1944, a single disastrous day in the history of Japanese naval aviation, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Japan launched Operation Ago, deploying nearly 450 aircraft at the American fleet. It was supposed to be the decisive blow. Instead, it became a heavy defeat. American radar saw them coming from over 100 miles away. Task Force 58 scrambled hundreds of F6F Hellcats. What happened next was a large-scale engagement. The American pilots, expertly guided by their ship's fighter directors, met the Japanese formations in a perfectly orchestrated defense. The Japanese pilots, many of them inexperienced, flew into a wall of lead. The Hellcats, with their advantages in speed, armor, and firepower, prevailed. One American pilot famously said, "Why, hell, it was just like an old-time turkey shoot down home." The name stuck. The Great Mariana's turkey shoot saw over 300 Japanese planes destroyed on the first day for the loss of only about 30 American planes. And what of the one-eyed ace who had laughed? Saburo Sakai was no longer a frontline combat pilot. His injuries had left him an instructor. He was stationed on Iwo Jima in June 1944, and he watched as the young men he trained were sent into the intense fighting. He had taught them the art of the dogfight, the skills that made him a legend. Now he heard the returning pilots' troubled accounts of a blue machine that couldn't be turned, couldn't be caught, and was incredibly robust. The laughter in the operations tent a year earlier had curdled into the bitter realization of a master watching his art become obsolete and his students sent into impossible battles. The Great Mariana's turkey shoot might have been the Hellcat's most significant achievement, but its job wasn't done. For the rest of the war, it was the dominant American fighter in the Pacific sky. The final numbers are remarkable. Over its 2 years of primary combat service, the F6F Hellcat was credited with destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft in United States and British service. This accounted for 56% of all U.S. Navy and Marine air-to-air victories in the entire war. Against those thousands of victories, only 270 Hellcats were lost in air-to-air combat. This resulted in an incredible overall victory-to-loss ratio, often cited as 19-1.
The plane earned a new nickname, the Ace Maker.
An astounding 305 U.S. Navy pilots became aces flying the Hellcat, more than in any other American fighter. Men like Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace with 34 victories, became legends at its controls. The Hellcat wasn't just a powerful machine. It was forgiving, a stable gun platform, and above all, it brought its pilots home, allowing them to gain experience and become even more formidable.
For Japan, the consequences were profound. The loss of veteran pilots had become an unrecoverable drain. By the end of the war, the pre-war cadre of elite, combat-experienced pilots had been practically wiped out. This eventually led to Japan's most desperate tactic, the kamikaze attacks. The rise of organized suicide attacks was the ultimate admission of conventional defeat in the air.
When your pilots can no longer survive an encounter with the enemy, the ultimate strategy becomes using the pilot himself as the weapon. The kamikaze was the tragic final act for an air force that had been dismantled by the Hellcat and the industrial system it represented. Years after the war, Saburo Sakai, the ace who survived, reflected on the conflict. He never lost respect for his beloved Zero, seeing it as a purer expression of aerial combat, but he had come to understand a brutal truth. The Zero was the better fighter, he reportedly said, but the Hellcat was the better weapon system. There's another poignant quote often attributed to Sakai that sums it all up: every Japanese pilot who survived the war did so because a Hellcat pilot chose to spare them. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at the mercy of your enemy. Whether he said those exact words or not, the sentiment captures the harsh reality. Japan had brought a beautifully crafted weapon to a technologically advanced conflict. They believed they were samurai. The Hellcat proved they were simply men with outdated weapons facing the future. So the story of the Hellcat versus the Zero is really more than a tale of two planes. It's the story of two philosophies of war colliding in midair. One, the Japanese philosophy, was based on individual skill, agility, and a warrior spirit, a belief that the man could overcome any material disadvantage. The other, the American philosophy, was one of systems, overwhelming force, industrial-scale production, and above all, prioritizing the survival of the operator. The F6F Hellcat was the perfect symbol of that American philosophy. It wasn't designed to win duels. It was designed to win a war. It was heavy because it carried the weight of armor, a powerful engine, and a doctrine that valued a pilot's life. The Japanese pilots laughed because they couldn't see past the weight. They couldn't understand that every extra pound on the Hellcat represented not a weakness but a piece of a comprehensive weapon system, a system of radar direction, coordinated tactics, superior training, and industrial might that they just couldn't match. By the time the laughter stopped, Japan's air forces had effectively been marginalized. The plane they mocked hadn't just defeated their legendary Zero. It had rendered its entire reason for being obsolete. The one-eyed ace, Saburo Sakai, survived to see the peace, a living monument to an era of air combat that had vanished in the face of industrial precision. The Hellcat had proven that in modern warfare, the most powerful weapon isn't always the sharpest sword but the most robust and relentless tool.